Well, hey guys, we are meeting again with another Beyond the Sermon. I am joined by Pastor Zac this morning. Pastor John is elsewhere. First things first, Zac, the rumor mill is going crazy. We've heard, or at least we think we've heard, allegedly, that you and your family have moved into town. Tell us all about it.
Yeah. So we obviously, folks that know me, we have been, I've been in the Polk County community since 1998. Went to Florida Southern College, just across the lake here. Been in this community for a long, long time. My previous church was in Haines City. Julie worked in Lakeland, so our first home after we lived in a couple of different apartments. We lived in Winter Haven, and that's where we stayed for a variety of reasons for 19 years. And it was not, um, in our opinion, was not a major challenge to the ministry for us here. And for a long, long time, it actually was a benefit. But about 2 months ago, almost 2 months, actually 2 months ago to the day as we're recording this, Julie and I independently woke up and said, we have to move to Lakeland. I mean, just like that. I mean, we want to be buried in the backyard of our home because we love our little home. It's a cozy, little house and that we've put a lot of love and care into for 19 years. But we we felt like, and there's a lot of people that want to ask me the deeper story about how we saw God lining things up. I'm happy to tell them because it is there are some miracle things that had to line up for us to get to where we're at now. But yeah, we purchased a home here in town, close to a lot of the folks that are in our church on the south side of town. And yeah, it's great. We're in the process though, still of moving.
Yeah.
And so, as anybody can tell you, as Josh, you well know, this is the first and only time I ever plan on selling a house and buying a house at the same time because that is rough. That's
A lot.
rough.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. So yeah, so we're actually technically right now we own two homes. Thankfully, our older home is under contract, so ask for people's prayers that it gets all the way across the finish line. But if everything goes according to the way we think God is lining it up, the way it looks like God is lining it up, we'll be fully moved into Lakeland, into our new house at the end of this month. So yeah, yeah. And we just decided,
Exciting.
let's make the the least busy time in the church calendar a little bit more exciting
Sure.
by
Yeah.
doing it right in the middle of Holy Week and all that. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well,
yeah, yeah, we're excited and my kids are excited and so for those that heard the how it goes, you said Josh, the rumor mill, people heard we're moving and then they immediately go, where are they thought we were leaving town. I was
sure.
like, actually it's the opposite is true. We're getting closer. So yeah, so that should assuage anyone's fears that I'm planning on going to another church or anytime in the near future. So yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. No, I love it. I'm excited for you guys, and I know it's a lot, but just glad you guys are here, and I think it's exciting, and there is something about the new house smell, so to speak, and making new memories, and also I think it's illegal to bury yourselves in your house, so that just you might want to look into that, but
Well, we're
I
not
could be
doing it in
wrong.
this one. Yeah, yeah. There, it was
We
funny because the very first day we closed on the new house in Lakeland, and we already had people over and kids in our pool. Like we had no furniture. I mean, but we had some folks from the parent group. They were over and helping us kind of make some decisions about paint and things that we remodeled, and so it was already kind of like God showing us like the potential for the ministry now at this stage of our lives. So yeah.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yep.
All right. Well, we are second week into the First Thessalonians conversation, and you and Pastor John were highlighting in two different ways, kind of what it means to be influential, and that got my mind thinking to, there's the modern way of influence, which is often through social media and kind of everything from TikTok to YouTube to really any of these social media platforms. back in the day. I'm not sure MySpace was ever utilized in that way. It was more music oriented, but
Yeah.
um,
That was my dude. That was my early days. I was a youth director, and the youth group kids set up my MySpace page for me. And yeah, it was some ministry, some early like micro blogging and things like that. But dude, it was the Wild
it
West
was the
of
Wild
social
West.
media. It was the Wild West.
All I remember about MySpace was, and we're dating ourselves here because anyone
Yeah,
younger that might be watching is like, I don't even know what that is, but
yeah. Google it.
was your
It's a hoot.
yeah was your like most important people. I don't know if you remember
Yeah,
this. It was like your
yeah.
top.
Your
I think it
top
was top
seven.
five, top 10. Yeah,
Top five, top seven, yeah, something like that. Yeah, yeah. And oh, and
well,
people would get real offended. They get real offended if you moved them out of the top five or whatever. Yeah.
yeah,
And
it was
everybody
like a
was friends,
whole like I can't believe I've
and
been
everybody,
bumped down.
yeah, and everybody was friends with Tom, right?
Yes, well, yeah, of course, yeah. Who I'm sure is a millionaire somewhere. I don't
Yeah.
know, in some beautiful island, but Um, well, in light of that, I brought up a passage. It's a little bit further than where you guys are, because I believe you're in chapter 2 of First Thessalonians. But in
Mhm.
chapter 4, Paul kind of continues this idea about aspiring to live a life quietly, to mind our own affairs, working with our own hands, that we may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. And we live in kind of a culture where we have two clashing symbols, if you will. On one hand is the fear of pushing our religion or our beliefs or our spirituality or faith down someone's throat and kind of yelling at
Mhm.
them. And it's the street corner way of evangelism via Facebook, right? It's like, here's some verses, repent, get your life right. It's the going on to YouTube and posting underneath it, hoping, I don't know what we hope, but just trolling in a sense. You kind of have that side of it. And I think a lot of people will maybe justify in their head that that's a good thing they're doing for the faith or for God's kingdom. That's their version of boldness. And then you kind of have the other
Mhm.
side, um, which tiptoes really around any kind of conversation of faith and is too afraid to really speak to anything other than maybe morals or good feelings. And so, in the midst of this, Paul is kind of highlighting his own uh, ministry and how, he wasn't doing it to be showy, he wasn't doing it to be greedy. Um, Many people read that I don't remember what is in Acts where Paul's preaching and a guy falls out a window. I remember hearing a sermon
Mhm.
like Paul was
Yep.
so boring that a guy fell asleep. I'm like, and I just believed it. And then I reread it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I'm not entirely sure that's what
That's not how
happened.
it worked. Yeah. Yeah.
But the whole point is that Paul wasn't seeking fame. And in fact, some of the churches, he didn't even ask for money. He wanted to make an impact wherever he went, but for the right reasons, right? His heart had to be in the
Mhm.
right place. And so, yeah, I think some of our listeners might be their struggle might be fear, too afraid to cross that conversation. And then the other side is I have no fear, and I'm just going to boldly, maybe in a mean way, kind of proclaim it. So my question really is like, how can a person be influential in today's day, but not be seeking fame or fortune at the same time? Because it kind of
Yeah.
seems like an oxymoron in a sense of like, well, to
Yeah.
be influential means I need to be famous or need to be heard
Mhm.
or heard loudly. So, yeah, how would one go about that?
I think it's I think a lot of it does have to do with desire, right? I mean, there are people who become famous Christian influencers, but that was never their intention. That was not their end goal, right? And and it part of it goes to the side that I really kind of the angle I was really taking with the passage this week was this idea of checking your motivation. And you just brought it up, the idea of, are you motivated by fear to not speak boldly, to not endure the suffering? I mean, John talked about it a bit, the threat of imprisonment and beatings and things like that was always in front of Paul, and it didn't stop him, right? So he wasn't he didn't let that motivation of fear potentially overwhelm him. The motivation of the gospel was greater. Um, but like, I do think there is a there is a heart, say a heart gut check you have to do pretty much every time you're doing anything that might garner attention. I mean, and what I think Christians on, so if you look at social media, I think some Christians on social media are naive to think that they don't realize that they're doing the street corner preaching equivalent on social media when they're, railing against, fill in the blank cultural drift, and they're using vitriolic language, and they're, basically pounding their digital fist on the keyboard. They have it in their heads that they're just talking to themselves, or they use it almost like you've seen it. And it's less now, I think, or maybe it's just less because I've muted enough people on social media that I don't see it as much. But
Your
but
algorithm has changed. Yeah.
yeah, my algorithm, I'm just not watching that. I'm not listening to that garbage. But there are folks that are like, well, it's they use it like almost like a digital journal. Like, you're so angry about this, and God is going to smite them, and His wrath. And they forget that no, that is street corner preaching that you're doing right there. It's just your sphere of influence might be 100 people on social media or whatever, but what's the motivation behind that? You got to do that heart gut check. Like, why am I hitting send on this? And do I realize like how that could be received? And is it is the motivation not just the articulation, is that gospel centered, right? Because like you can again, this is why Paul writes about speaking the truth in love. I mean, that it's and neither one of those are contradictory to one another, but they when they're done properly, and there's a gut check of motivation, you can say, well, either A, this is important enough for me to address with the gospel, and B, I need to find a way that the way is also gospel centered, not just the message is gospel centered. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
and then, or the gospel centered thing to do is to say nothing in this context. I mean, there are times when the gospel centered thing to do is to not preach. I mean, it's one of the interesting things in the book of Acts where, Paul desires to go one direction and the Holy Spirit tells him to go someplace different, because for whatever reason, the gospel thing to do was not go to preach to one community, but instead go to preach to another community. And it's not because the first community wasn't worthy of the gospel. It's because it wasn't the time, and the receptivity wouldn't have been there. So, I mean, I think checking the heart of the checking our heart when we are posting or saying or even, liking or sharing things with others is a really big deal, because yeah, there are people who they want to feed into the algorithm
Yeah.
of of division and, you know, argumentation, and because they want to light the match that's going to drive people to bring attention to themselves. And that's not obviously not gospel centered. That's obviously not gospel centered. So I think that's where it's a lot of work to do that.
Yeah.
you
Uh,
know, it's a
well, I was
lot of
gonna.
work to ask yourself that question, like, when
Yeah.
you're doing something that might be public facing, to say, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Is it really for the sake of the gospel, or am I doing it to gain attention, or am I doing it to blow off steam, or am I doing it to hurt my political enemies? Like,
Yeah.
that's a lot of work.
Well, there's a couple things as you're saying that came to my mind. One is, there is such a thing as an algorithm, and so we're kind of highlighting the social media side of things. And the truth is, critical things or tear down things, um, feed the flesh. And so the
Mhm.
algorithm is going to find what people respond to the most and what gets the most clicks. And so ironically, in and sadly in the YouTube world, um, the teardowns of a certain leader or certain church or certain theology or even political side is just going to get more views. And so at the heart of that, though, as we're talking about being influential, it's whether you're afraid or you're overbold or you're fame seeking or maybe you naively are doing all these things. um I think it's that we're shaped by how people think about us, right? Like
Mhm.
whether I'm too afraid of them or maybe I just don't love them enough, right? Like because it's easy to armchair blast people. It's much harder when I'm
Mhm.
sitting across from someone person to person to say the same thing. And I mean, there certainly are people who would do that too, but you'll find yourself emboldened online. And then, of course, you get the people who agree with you flooding and
Mhm.
feeding that kind of monster in a sense. And so,
That's that echo chamber effect where you
yeah.
just hear your own opinions reflected back to you through other people. Yeah.
So how do you, can I ask you, this is not a question we really had, but as I'm thinking through it, like, how do you learn to love the Lord so much and his kingdom so much that you kind of put aside thinking about people one way or the other and just go, I
Mhm.
believe the Holy Spirit is calling me to do this no matter what comes, the suffering, the mocking, or even maybe even popularity. But it's like that, I think of I bring him up a lot, but Francis Chan, he was a mega pastor, right? At one point was selling
Mhm.
books, is still, kind of somewhat in the cycle of the tours of different like preaching gigs
Mhm.
and whatnot. But he got to the point where one day, I mean, he went to another mega church and just pastor and said, like, hey, is this what we're really like? Is this what we're trying to do? It's just like pack, do five things on a Sunday and pack more people in. And like, he's like, I don't even know who these people are anymore. I have no connection to them. And he's like, is this real? And the pastor was like, yes, God's blessing you. Just keep doing it, keep doing more. And John Mark Comer's another one who burned out on all that, just going like it feeds your ego. It becomes more about the platform than it even becomes about being a shepherd and what it means to preach and teach. And
Mhm.
so he heard the Lord, Chan did, heard the Lord calling him out of it. And he did, and he changed gears. He went to China, and then he's kind of done a whole bunch of kind of smaller scale things. And so I just highlight that to say that popularity doesn't necessarily mean you're doing what the Lord's calling you to do. In fact, it might be the opposite. And so, um, if I'm thinking of somebody at work who skates the line of talking about good things, but never really broaching the gospel or never really directly just saying, hey, I trust the Lord for my eternity, and never really taking that, it's like in my head I might convince myself, well, I've got all these friends and they all like me and I'm likable, therefore I must be doing something good, when really Christ might be going, no, actually I want you to be bolder and say
Mhm.
something. And you know what? You're going to lose some of those people. And you don't
Mhm.
mistreat them. You don't firebomb them. You don't react to
Mhm.
that. Like, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Or where's your mind with all that? I threw out a
Yeah,
lot.
I mean, it is a balance though, right? I mean, because um I think there is I mean, what are the two greatest commandments? Is love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So there and it's interesting because even in this passage in First Thessalonians 2, you have on one hand Paul saying we didn't do anything, we didn't speak with flattery, we weren't trying to, kind of schmooze people with any kind of pretext for greed or anything like that. But then he's also like gushing with love and affection for the church there, right? So there is a love for people, but it's is it I think is it a love for the people or just this generic people kind of thing, right? It's like, do you have, and this is one of the reasons, like, me personally, I always prioritized the call to a people rather than the call to a position, right? So I get asked all the time, why am I not a senior pastor? Why, and the answer, the simple answer is God hasn't called me to a position. He's called me to a people. And I stayed in First Pres Haines City for 12 years because I was called there. And I, even when it got rough, like at the last year and a half, I still was like, no, Lord has called me to these people, and I'm dealing with a lot of kind of negativity and suffering from some of the leadership at that point, but there are still people that need the gospel, and I picture their faces and their families and love on them, right? It wasn't until I felt released to go to, that it was somebody else's responsibility to shepherd, that I left, right? And I think with and you see there are mega church pastors who I think do it as well as it can be done.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, I think of someone like Rick Warren, who, you know, I mean, has been called America's pastor before, right? But he handed over the reins when he was probably at the height of his powers, so to speak. I use air quotes there, right? And lived pretty humbly, and he was pretty honest about some of his own shortcomings. I mean, he had a child that dealt with mental illness, and he wasn't shy about it. And he took it on the chin. I mean, he took it on he and his wife both. And obviously he's not perfect, but he he did some things that ruffled some feathers from people that it would have been a lot easier for him just to, I think of John Piper is, the same. I mean, and he gave it up because, like before Francis Chan, he's like, this church at Bethlehem is, I'm losing connection with people, right? It's become more about the entity, right? And
Hmm.
keeping up. And again, I think there are better ways to do megachurchdom, and there are probably less better ways to, I don't know, that's probably
Sure.
bad grammar, but less good ways. But I think that's an exception and not the rule. And I think the rule is far more that, and I think in our model in Presbyterianism, it's about as close as it gets to getting it right. I mean, this congregation is 140 years old.
Mhm.
We have had, I don't know, a dozen pastors. Some of those pastors have been very good. Some of them have not been very good. We've had men in this position who have sought to disrupt the peace, purity, and unity of the church, and yet the congregation remains. Because at the heart, the congregation's goal was for the sake of the gospel, not the sake of one particular leader.
Man, yeah.
And
I'm
so I think setting up I think there's some institutional things that get set up, and you and I, we can name the names of institutional churches that fall apart as soon as the the celebrity
right.
pastor
Yeah. Leaves.
falls or
Yeah.
leaves or whatever, and then you're like, well, what was it, like to Chan's point, what was it all for, right?
Well,
I
unfortunately, it
mean,
seems like there's a growing number of larger pastors falling right now, and so that, I mean, that means something, right? Not to say that all.
mhm.
I'm reading a book by a gentleman named Watchman Nee, which
Oh,
apparently
yeah, old
everybody
school,
knows that name except for me. So
old school, yeah, old school.
yes, yes. So he has one on the church life, the normal Christian church life, and I've found it um, pretty insightful. But one of the things he's hitting on is that part of the issue in today's age is we do have a global reach, or at least a United States sort of reach, in the sense that I can
Hmm.
get a video, and as long as the algorithm's feeding it, or I've got the right hashtags or tags connected to it, I can have people all over the world, Russia, you name it, China,
Yeah.
watching my videos and partaking. And to your earlier point, the problem is God has called all of us, whether you're a shepherd or preacher or just a lay person, to love the people in your local church. And so Watchman does a good
Hmm.
job by saying, even when Paul is writing a lot of these letters where he might not be the elder of that particular church, he's giving advice, but ultimately handing it off to the elders of that church to go,
Yeah.
you are responsible for the execution of the Lord's, not, like I might encourage you and even
Mhm.
rebuke you, but like I have my own church that I'm in charge of. And so there's a ownership, if you will, under Christ as the head, that each person is liable for their church. And so as I'm thinking of like the layperson, the first question I have is like, do I love the things that my church gives me and provides, or do I love the people of the church? And the reality is, like, for a larger church like ours, you can't answer that and say I love all the church. You're like, I don't know all the church, right? I'm not connect. It's like a YouTube channel. It's like, hey, I love you guys. I'm like, no, you wouldn't. If you met half the people that are following you, you'd hate them, but or at least not want to hang out with them. So it's like, in our church, it's like, think of the people you have the most time spent with, right? And that might be a small group, that might be a class setting on a Sunday morning or Wednesday night, whatever it looks like. Do I pray that Christ gives me his love for this group of people that I know, even the ones I don't know, that I love them more, that I
Mhm.
cherish them more. And so whatever skill sets I've been given are meant to um, build up that this particular group of people. And so, because you and I and Pastor John will get these emails from time to time, and some are encouraging, some are less encouraging, some might be a response to an article or what have you. And a lot of times they're just kind of it's like whatever algorithm they're pumped into, it's like their thing that they're really fired up about. And it's cool to see what a person's fired up about, but you're going, how would I, like, how would I
Yeah.
speak to a large group of people in coming from so many different directions, and then my platform becomes more about how I feel about things and less about how Christ feels about things. And so, yeah, anyway, my encouragement, I guess, is do I really love the people of my church? And if the answer is
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I start praying about that. Like, Lord,
Mhm.
and I do. I literally, that is on my list. It sounds bizarre, but on my list of prayer is, let me love the people of this church more, Lord. Let me see them the way you see them, um, and care for them in that way. And so I think anyone should start there, maybe, and then go.
Absolutely.
And then if I've got issues, yeah, let me talk to my leaders about it, or talk to my group about it and wrestle those things with them. But yeah,
Yeah, I think if you're wanting a biblically kind of based model of discipleship, it's one that is set in the context of a community. And like if a person's kind of MO in their faith walk is not situated in a community, then their discipleship is inherently going to suffer,
yeah,
and unless you are one of those unique characters like Paul, who was an itinerant church planter, like, and that's rare. I mean, like in the listing of roles and gifts that God gives people, the apostleship one is very unique and very
yes,
rare.
yeah,
Um, it's there, and there are modern day apostles, that are called to go and be an encourager in multiple kind of communities, and they rotate around. And I've known some of them that do it exceptionally well, but they will tell you they miss something in their own discipleship by being planted in a community, and they struggle with that. Uh, but for the rest of us, it's community based. I mean, that's why, in later in this book, you see Paul talking about how Timothy goes back to Thessaloniki and actually, like, it brings the encouraging word. And you
yeah,
mentioned it too. Paul writes to the church in Ephesus. Well, Timothy's the one that ultimately becomes the pastor in the church in
yeah,
Ephesus. And so Paul is writing to both the church in Ephesus, and then later he writes to Timothy, because Timothy's the one that's going to have to execute everything that he's writing him as encouraging, right? So And one of the things that Paul writes to Timothy in his letters to Timothy is about developing this deep love and affection for the people there. And it's one of the things that Paul writes to the church in Ephesus about being the church. That's why he uses so much family imagery in the book of Ephesians. And that's why you see that here. I mean, John talked about the family imagery. I talked about the parent imagery. We're going to talk a lot more about it this week because it's Mother's Day and it plays into it. But if we don't have, as individuals, whether we're leaders or lay people, that if we're not developing that level of affection, then we're going to be chasing the false kind of. I think, not to get too like psychoanalytical, but I think the desire for fame and good reputation is actually a cheap replacement for being known in a deep relationship. It's being
Well
known at
said.
this high superficial level,
Yeah.
and so if you don't have a deep love and affection for the community that you're serving in and with, then you're gonna chase. It's gonna be easier to chase that fame, false replacement, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and quickly expound just to say, like, when you're talking about community, we are highlighting proximity community, meaning I think a lot of people online think that that's a community, and it is a community of sorts, but
Yeah,
it's person to person in the sense of like, no,
you're
I'm
not
in the
showing up
same.
for. Yeah, you're not showing up online for a person that's in the hospital bed, though. I mean, you can
Yeah.
pray for people, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have the tools of technology can have powerful effect for the gospel, and they can actually have powerful effect for strengthening the physical proximate community when you're not physically together.
Yeah.
But it's not a replacement for. It's not the same, right? It's not the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, and by the way, side note, I noticed you and Pastor John used and you told me earlier you're bouncing off of Ed's use of Thessaloniki, and I
Yeah.
hate it. I like Thessalonica, and I'm gonna keep it to that. I don't even care if that's wrong. I'm like, no, I can't
I
do it.
think it's just the way the modern town is named. I probably maybe this Sunday I'll probably go back to Thessalonica, just because I do prefer Thessalonica. But I was following Ed in Classic, and he said Thessaloniki, and that is the modern town there for sure. That is how they pronounce it. But I always grew up here in Thessalonica,
Oh
and
yeah.
so in terms of the ancient town, right?
Well, is it? Man, it might be like, I think instead of Elisha, it's Alicia is the proper pronunciation. And I'm like, nah,
Yeah, I'm
I'll
going with
avoid that
that. I'm not going with that.
one. Well, that brings me to really the second question, which is as these platforms grow. Now, I know depending on who's watching, probably from like millennials below, the online world holds a big part for us. I mean, I'm an
Mhm.
avid YouTuber. It's funny, in my men's group, one of our guys, Mike, who's got to be, I think, around maybe 60ish, somewhere around there. And he's more avid at YouTube than I am, but it's that's pretty rare. Like I'll bring up somebody, I'm like, none of these guys are gonna know who that. And Mike's like, oh yeah, actually that guy. And I'm like, how does he know every time? But these platforms or tools really are growing, and they can be excellent in deep diving into harder subjects, or like you said, using Zoom to connect, or FaceTime to connect and do kind of a Bible study of just our schedules, or we're in different cities or whatever have you. But so we have a lot of young Christians who I think are in a good way being emboldened to use these platforms, but it can easily get twisted, just like anything can. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen this, but it's on TikTok or Reels, and it's not happening as much anymore. But it'll be a young man or whatever, and he's like in the gym, and it's like, I live for the Lord. And this is I thought they were joking because it was so corny, but then it turned out that they weren't. I'm like, oh no. And like literally as he's holding his Bible, he's like flexing, and I'm not like, and he's got a cut off, and like they're but it wasn't. I thought it was like a comedy, like being a dork or whatever for Jesus. But no, he was like in the Lord's word, and he's like trying to flex up. And so there's this like weird gym culture and now Jesus mixed
Yeah.
together, and you see things where I think there's a genuine, maybe a genuine desire to go like, hey, I'm a believer, but there's this synchronism of wanting fame and popularity that maybe they're not seeing because they're young and brains are still developing,
Yeah.
sort of thing. But I think older adults can do this too. We can use platform or tools in a way um, that really isn't glorifying to God. And so how do we use these tools rightfully? How do we check our hearts to make sure that when I'm proclaiming things via Facebook or what have you, that
Yeah.
um, that I am loving people properly or glorifying God properly?
I think again, I'm always going to be a technology apologist. To because I think every great movement of the church, faith, whatever, has followed a wave of technology if the church is bold enough to actually use it. I mean, the first book off the printing press was Gutenberg's Bible, right? But it's the same technology was almost immediately used for pornography.
Mm.
So the technology is only as good as the hands that it's in. And I think that's funny. I mean, your algorithm is very different. I don't have gym culture on my algorithm, but I do get, my son is a big Lego fan. And so, and I grew up with Lego. So I'm not on TikTok. I'm too old for that. So anything that's been on
Same,
TikTok, I
same,
see,
yeah.
I see it, I see it on Reels on Instagram like 2 months later after everybody else has seen it on TikTok. Um, but I will see like things like, Lego fans that are Christians, they do what they call mocks, my own creation. So they take just random bricks. They have no, they create their own instructions or they don't have instructions. They just build things and like they'll do like this past Easter. I mean, I saw Lego creators creating the empty tomb scene with Mary and that thing. I'm like, some people look at that and go, well, that's kind of hokey potentially, but I look at that and go, okay, well, is that using what they've got to the glory of God? And are they doing it to the glory of God for themselves, right? And a guy in the gym flexing the muscles, I mean, again, I look at that and say, yeah, that is kind of cringy, but I'll even go back and look at like athlete interviews on television after they've won a game and they'll talk about all glory to God and go, I mean, how is it that different? And
Sure.
is the motivation again, I think the heartbeat is it's really between um well, and I'll say this too. I think some of it you can see in one of the benefits we have now is we can see the history of people posting over time, right?
Hmm.
So if a the history so if you got like one guy doing the cringy muscle flex thing, I live for Jesus, and that's kind of the MO of that dude like every day, I like there might be something, that might demonstrate something about his character. I mean, as
That's
John
fair.
was talking
Yeah,
about
yeah. There's an
character versus
integrity to
reputation.
it.
Yeah, right. But if it's, if the guy is, not posting about himself on other days, elevating the good of other people, or the good of God seen in other people. I mean, maybe there's less of an ego going there. I mean, I don't know. Probably not. I mean, that's just my hunch is usually people post like those sorts of things. So I you know, it goes back a little bit to like the megachurch pastors, right? And one of the things that makes me leery about megachurch pastors is um, it's almost Catholic in its approach to things like scripture or leadership, and not biblical because it's like and again, I don't like to throw shade at other churches, but I mean, you're planting churches that have 10 campuses or 7 campuses, and you're beaming in the message from
Yeah.
one person,
Yep.
like what does that communicate? It communicates that the gospel can only be delivered by one dude, and it's almost I I can't I mean I can't name a female megachurch pastor, but so it's always a dude. Um, and it communicates that the gospel sits like in the seat of one person. I mean, how Catholic is that? I mean, that's
Yeah.
like we just elected a pope for this church planting community, right? Rather than handing off leadership and like handing off opportunities to say, look, I maybe God has blessed a particular person with gifts to rise up and lead, but it's never just for themselves to gain their own glory. Because look at like the Paul, Timothy, Titus, Silas. I mean, it's always handing it off, handing it off, handing it off. And I think the same thing gets to be true with social media. If like if a person is constantly kind of eh, not to be punny, but always flexing like how spiritual they are and how awesome they are with Jesus, and not to say you can't do that once in a while, because Paul talked about it last week. You imitated us, right? So there is a level where that's okay, but he immediately moves to encouraging them about like their reputation of faith. He said their reputation of faith is so it's like if you're pointing at other people and saying, "Man, look at what God is doing in their life," if you're using your social media platform to kind of highlight that and balancing that, I don't know. I think that speaks a lot more to the heart of what at least the gospel um, kind of methodology is. God raised up leaders throughout Old and New Testament, and the leader was always, always, always looking to hand it off to
Yeah.
somebody else. Now, sometimes it took 40 years, but it was never so that that person would stay entrenched and be the center of their own gospel universe, so to speak. And I don't know. I think looking at ourselves and saying, how much am I like able to applaud um, what God is doing in other people, and using my megaphone. It's one of the things that I appreciate as I watch some of the older megachurch leaders kind of they went through a season where you could tell they really did, like it was kind of they were the center of the universe, and now as they've gotten older they're kind of realizing, wait a minute, that's not really my job. My job is
Mm.
to hand this off, and they're starting to hand it off. You start to see that, and they'll hand it off. They'll hand the platform off to somebody you've never heard of, and you're like, oh, well, that's cool that I've never heard of this person before. That God recognized something, they recognized something, the church recognized something. They're handing that off. Um,
Right.
so I don't know. I think there's some of that. Like you can kind of see that to some extent by how much you're willing to hero somebody else.
Well, and I think like maybe what I'm thinking in my head at the end of the day is it sometimes is easier to curate an image of boldness than it is to actually be bold in real life. And so there are a lot of
Yeah.
people who, when Paul says imitate my life, he has the receipts, as they say, meaning he,
Yeah.
if you checked in on his life, he genuinely loved the Lord, and you could point to the people that he's poured into. And so for so many of us, it would be easy to curate this online persona, which is what we do all the time, right? The best
Yeah.
pictures, we filter them and all this kind of stuff. When the reality of our life is maybe we're too afraid to even bring that up. So it's like I can
Yeah.
flex the Bible on this video, but do I ever just talk about Jesus, or do I ever, um, am I living obedient in the spaces where nobody sees me? And
Yeah.
so I think maybe integrity really is the big characteristic that we're highlighting is
Hmm.
um and I think on the fear side of it, if I'm going, do I really believe Jesus is the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings? Do I really believe that he has called me? Maybe I'm not uh like going to be the next preacher, teacher. That's not the skill set God's called me, but I have a space of influence where I work and in my home and the people I see. um if I really believe God is who he is and he's called me and I have the same Holy Spirit that Zach McGowan does, and then can I not be bold despite what they might think of me to say, hey, where are you in your faith? Or what do you think of,
Hmm.
when the word Christian or God comes, or
Hmm.
Jesus on the cross and Easter, like what
Hmm.
crosses your mind? What do you think about that?
Hmm.
And just trust that the Holy Spirit's going to start something. And it
Yeah.
might be a negative, but I've found over time that people are willing, if I have a humility about the question I'm asking, they're at least willing to like humor
Yeah.
me, at the
Hmm.
very least, and I can get something off the ground and start that conversation. And I think of I want to boast a little bit about Trip. He's Godwin. He's one of our guys, and he's been having these discussions at work, and he said his boss was like, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in any of this, so pretty much kick back. But then he's had these other two guys who were like, wait, so you like go to church and like go to a men's group specifically for that? And there's been these questions in it, and I'm blown away that for Trip he's going like, yeah, if this is what I believe and who I'm about, why
Hmm.
shouldn't I have these conversations? And who cares if my boss thinks, is like, obviously, okay, if that's a closed door, I'm not gonna burst it open, but
Yeah.
at least my boss knows now, just in case. So I'm encouraged by
Yeah.
that, and I think our watchers can know that it starts somewhere, right? One little question. But
Hmm.
guys, we're
Yeah.
going to take a break and then we will return with our questions for our grow groups. So see you in a minute. All right, guys, we're back for the section where we throw out some potential questions that our grow groups or small groups might be able to get conversation going with. Zach, any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the cool thing about this First Thessalonians book is that there are a lot of different angles you could dig into with this with each one of these passages. I think the things that kind of jump out at me are just kind of if you looked at the actions that you've taken, the career choices that you made, the way you've parented, how you deal with your friendship, what are the driving factors in the actions that you take? I mean, when you look at kind of the jokes you make or whatever, like, are you acting out of a fear or a desire to be liked or whatever? Like, I would say, like, if you could think back to a specific time when you're like, yeah, dude, my motivation was jacked up right there. I was trying to impress people. I was trying to be well liked. So I did this thing. I said this thing. I absolutely shouldn't have. I think about like when I first went to Florida Southern. I have a fairly substantial birthmark on my right hand, and as a freshman, um, uh, like I had made up this entire story that I had say it was not a birthmark, it was a scar from where I had saved my my infant sister from a crib that was burning, right? And it was just like,
Sure.
and then I would be like, oh no, that's just a joke, right? And the motivation was just to be kind of like silly and impressive, and then kind of pull the rug out from under people, Um, so like I think back to this, like what was I doing there, right?
Sure. Yeah.
What was that about, right? Like that was so ridiculously stupid, but had nothing to do with the love of God and love of others, and um, you know, uh, and I think about even times when I've preached sermons where I look back and go, I'm so glad that the Holy Spirit is bigger than my pompous, like ridiculous self. Like, and I can go back and point to specific ones where I'm like, yeah, dude, you were reaching right there to for people to think you were something else that you're not. And that happens to pastors. So I would say, can you go back? Can you go back and think like, can you call out yourself? Like a specific moment in your life where you're like, yeah, I was trying to be well liked in this moment. And like it went beyond just the I want to have good friends and I don't, it went beyond that. It went beyond um kind of the typical ordinary sort of thing. I mean, I think it's so rare for someone to be so self-effacing that they don't think about what other people think of them at all. But like there is that limit. You know what that limit is, Um like taking a shower, combing your hair, doing all those things. That's not because it's easy. That's because you want people to think you're you're
Sure.
normal, right? But
Yeah.
there is that level where it goes over and above that where you're like I'm trying to be impressive. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we have the shame cards in the back of our minds where we like can pull that out. So I'd say what is that? And then like what have been the times where we have just been too afraid to speak up for our faith,
Mm,
whether in our actions, whether it was there was an opportunity that you absolutely knew that the Holy Spirit was teeing you up to be able to do something that was gospel oriented, whether it was actually going all the way presenting the whatever four spiritual laws, or as simple as inviting someone to church for an event or for a service that you knew the gospel is going to be presented, but like you just chickened out. Um,
sure.
um, what has that been like? Or there have been times where, and I think John mentioned service. I did the same thing. I did a little bit harder in the live services where it's like, no, my motivation to say no to a service opportunity has nothing to do with the gospel. It has everything to do with the fact that I'm a selfish, lazy bum, and I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough time in front of my television this weekend, instead of helping my neighbor or whatever. Like, when have those times happened, and can we be bold enough to actually kind of break those things down, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would think like, I think there's this thought that living or going to work is a kind of like a neutral thing. Like,
Mhm.
um, maybe I go there to do something cool. Maybe I go there to help people. Maybe I go there to make money, right? That's a big motivator.
Yeah.
But then that's the only thing that drives you. But like, have I ever asked the question that I am working where I'm working to be influential for Christ too? So it's like, yes, I want to do a good job, and yes, I want to do cool things or whatever it is, but for the glory of God. And so we talk about for the glory of God, but part of for the glory of God means I verbally talk about that. And so I think sometimes when we talk about like loving our neighbor, we think of that in like a standoffish sort of way, like, well, I don't hurt you or I don't go out of my way
Mhm.
to hurt you, therefore I'm loving you. And it's like love is an action. It's not a neutral
Mhm.
um standoffish thing. And we know this with Christ. Christ loved us so much he came down, right? And then
Yeah.
lived with among us. And so like in order for me to love my neighbor, whether that's at work or wherever it is, I have to actually like do things and take action and serve them and love them
Mhm.
in specific ways beyond just the job, beyond just being kind, beyond. And so, for me, I think like, do I think that way about my workspace? Like, do I even think that way?
Yeah.
So let me start there. And then two,
Yeah.
pick two or three people that I'm going to go, those are my people that I'm just going to love for the Lord, and I'm going to think of specific ways to be kind to them and to speak truth to them and bring these conversations up. And so I tend to
Yeah.
think of questions I'm going to ask. I was a manager over a car wash, and I had I don't know, 12 to 14 guys and girls. Some were teenagers, some were adults. And in my head, I'm going, well, I could be here and be a good boss. That's a first start, right?
Mhm.
I can make sure I take care of my people. And I would say
Mhm.
that is good humaning. Like, you're being a good
Mhm.
human, good job. But I'm going, is that faithful? So the next question
Mhm.
was, well, then how do I use this space as a place to care for their deeper needs and ask deeper questions? And so I had to come up with those. I had to spend some time thinking like, how do I talk to someone that's an agnostic or has never thought about faith? And so I would, after getting to know them, and so that was the first thing, is get to know them on a personal level. And I
Yeah.
know there's some, you might have to have some boundaries, but um tell them I was praying over them. And then, so I was intentional, is my point. I was intentional with my
Yeah.
faith, that I wasn't accidentally there. I was there for a
Yeah.
purpose. And those people God had brought into my life for a purpose too. That
Well,
might
I
be,
think some yeah, and I think something too though you just said was in those spaces, and I think it can be in a workspace, it can be in a school space, and boundaries are important. But I think one of the things that as Christians we're called to do is question the boundaries that we set up. Are those boundaries for my safety, which are legitimate, or are they for my comfort and convenience, which are
mhm,
illegitimate, right? And the human boundaries are the ones that are both safe and comfortable and convenient. Being a good boss in your 9 to 5, that's just, that's just being a decent person, right? But like going to say, well, is there a flexing on that human boundary for the sake of the gospel? I think about like my wife has worked in secular, she's worked in the medical device field for over 20 years. And the job that she had for 17, 18 years was here in town at the sustainability side of Stryker Medical. So if you go to the hospital, you look at the bed that you're sleeping on, more than likely it's either a Stryker bed or a Hill-Rom bed. Um, and I remember one time she was like on a Saturday, she was like going to go to the funeral of somebody. And I'm like, well, who is this? Like, you're going, like, I didn't know this person. It's like, oh, she works with me. Right. And I'm like, oh, yeah, cool. And when come to find out, it wasn't like someone she worked with. It wasn't even someone that worked for her. It was like the grandmother of one of the janitors that was on the second shift that she had gotten to know during the times where she had to work second shift, which is like, for people that don't know, second shift is like, that's late, man. That's like nobody's there. That's like you get paid a little bit more, but you don't really see a lot of people. And I was like, how do you know them? Oh, well, and Jules like had this life story of this person who wasn't, had immigrated here. And I was just like blown away. But she looked at that differently, right? Like it was almost like a pastoral kind of mindset in a secular environment, right? And that's kind of like what you're talking about. It's like that's crossing some lines that some people don't feel like they want to cross. But it's like Paul has this great gentility and affection for the people in this church that goes way beyond just kind of the typical settings. And I think one of the questions that might be interesting is, what are the boundaries that we set up, whether it's with our physical neighbors, whether it's with, the other families in our kids' soccer league, whether it's at our job, that aren't for safety reasons, that aren't for like, mental health reasons. They're just because we don't want to be bothered.
yeah,
And are those the kind of things that we're willing to flex for, not for everybody? Because if you got like a soccer team of 22 kids and every family, like that gets to be, but like, are there, like you said, like I think two or three people where you're just getting like praying through it, saying, God, direct me to a couple people that I'm gonna be willing to flex my boundary for the sake of the gospel, to cross that fear threshold and just love on them for the sake of Christ, and maybe open up a conversation for the sake of the gospel. Yeah, I think you're dead on. I mean, the places that God has put us, He's put us for a reason, and whether they are explicitly ministry places or not, they always have ministry opportunity, whether we are willing to see it that way or not.
amen. And quite frankly, if we're full-time workers, that's where we spend most of our time. So it's like, don't you
Yeah,
want that to be the end of your story? Is, and again, it
yeah,
doesn't have to be the whole company, but I picked two or three people and I poured into them for the sake. And if we're being frank, do I really care about people's eternity? I mean,
hmm,
and so to be honest with you, no. Do I go to every Publix and think about everybody that checks me out and, go to the gat? No, I'm not really, it's impossible for me to track all that. But I can pray that God gives me a sense of burden for that, and He delivers. So be careful; He does open that that up pretty wide. And two, can I pick a few people that I go, it seems like there's a potential here, or quite frankly, if I love someone and I think about it this way, like if I love somebody's personality or they're just an incredible person or whatever it is, they're so serving. In my head, I'm going, I want this person to be with me in eternity. Like
Mhm.
I know I can't convince them of that, but like whatever part I can play in dishing the gospel out, I picked this person because I want to see him. And sometimes I've done the opposite where it's like the person that annoys me the most, I'm like, I want to see that person in eternity. Because if God could take this crusty, dusty jerk over here and do anything with them, man, what could he do with that person? Right. And
Yeah.
um but I think you said it. I think influence is part of shepherding, and all of us get to be shepherds wherever we are. All of us.
Somewhere. Yeah.
You don't have to be a professional or a pastor. All of us get to be a shepherd somewhere. So